All right, so we're diving into give and take today, which I'm guessing means someone out there wants to know if nice guys really do finish last, or can you actually get ahead by being a giver?
Well, it's not quite as easy as just slapping labels on people, calling them givers or takers, and calling it a day.
So we're not judging this book by its cover.
Not at all. This deep dive is all about nuance. How different ways of giving and taking play out at work in our personal lives, really everywhere.
Okay, so less about stereotypes and more about the nitty-gritty of how these different styles actually work.
Exactly. And to kick things off, let's talk about a venture capitalist named David Hornick. This guy is known for being a genuinely good person in the cutthroat world of startups, and it actually cost him a major deal.
Wait, hold on. Being too nice lost him a deal. How's that even possible?
So the entrepreneur Danny Shader had heard through the grapevine that Hornick was a generous investor, even checked references who said, yeah, he's the real deal. But in the end, Shader chose a different investor, someone known for being a tough mentor.
So even if someone's track record screams, I'm here to help, you might still need to prove you can deliver the tough love, especially in a competitive field.
It's like that extra push some people feel they need, even if it means working with someone who's less agreeable.
Interesting. So is this giver-taker thing mostly a business world problem? Or does it pop up in other areas of life too? Like what about politics?
Oh, absolutely. Let's rewind the clock back to 1855, the Illinois Senate race. Lyman Trumbull, a seasoned politician, was going head-to-head with William Sampson, a lawyer famous for his generosity.
Okay, so was Samson some kind of wolf in sheep's clothing, putting on a nice guy act to get ahead?
Not even close. Sampson was deeply admired for his generosity, even more so than Trumbull. But here's the kicker. Sampson believed so strongly in Trumbull's stance on a critical social issue that he actually dropped out of the race.
He dropped out. You're kidding. He gave up his own campaign to support his opponent.
And he didn't just step aside. He urged his own supporters to vote for Trumbull. Talk about putting your principles first.
Wow, that's a whole other level of generous long. But it must have been a tough call, especially in the middle of a heated campaign.
It was a selfless act, for sure, one that ultimately cost Sampson the election. But it highlights something crucial about give and take. It's not about labeling people. It's about understanding that giving can take many forms and show up in unexpected ways. What looks like weakness on the surface can actually be a powerful form of generosity.
So how do we make sense of these situations where being a giver seems like a disadvantage? What does the book say about that?
Well, give and take really digs into those potential pitfalls that givers often stumble into. One of the big ones is this tendency to be too trusting, which can make them vulnerable to being taken advantage of.
Yeah, there's that old saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Givers need to be a bit more cautious about who they trust and how much they give.
Exactly. It's not about becoming cynical or suspicious of everyone, just a bit more discerning. And that's where sincerity screening comes in. It's like a strategy to help you identify those takers before it's too late.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Tell me more about this sincerity screening. How do we become human lie detectors?
It's less about channeling your inner Sherlock Holmes and more about paying close attention to those subtle cues and patterns. For example, how someone treats people in a position of less power speaks volumes about their character.
So basically, you can tell a lot about a person by how they treat the waiter or the intern. It's like their true colors come out.
Exactly. And that's just one small piece of the puzzle. The book goes into a lot more detail about how to spot those red flags early on. We'll also be diving into practical strategies for avoiding those common giver traps, like over-empathizing to the point where you neglect your own needs.
You know, that reminds me of the case study about Lillian Bauer, the consultant. Didn't she get passed over for a partnership because her generosity was mistaken for weakness?
You got it. Lillian's story is a perfect example of how givers can get stuck in this cycle of giving too much and receiving too little. She was amazing at her job, always going above and beyond, but her generosity wasn't seen as a strength. It was actually holding her back.
That's tough,
Yeah.
especially for someone so talented. So how do we avoid falling into that trap? How do you strike that balance between being generous and becoming a doormat?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Give and Take offers some really insightful answers. One of the key takeaways is the importance of setting boundaries.
So it's okay for givers to say no sometimes.
Absolutely. It's about setting those limits on how much you're willing to give so you don't end up feeling burned out or resentful. You can't pour from an empty cup, right?
So self-care isn't selfish. It's essential for sustainable giving. I like that. Now, are you ready for a curveball?
Always. Hit me with it.
Okay, so according to Give and Take, you might be able to spot a taker just by looking at a single photo.
Now, that's what I call a cliffhanger.
Okay, so last time we were left with this tantalizing idea that you could spot a taker just from a photo.
Right. Well, it's not exactly like some kind of superpower. It's not foolproof. But research shows there are these little visual clues that can give you hints about someone's reciprocity style.
Hints like what?
So, for instance, one study looked at CEO photos and annual reports, and they found a link between the size of the photo and the CEO's tendency towards being a taker.
Wait, so the bigger the ego, the bigger the headshot?
It's not about vanity exactly, more like these subtle signals that leak out and give us a peek behind the curtain at someone's real motivations and behaviors.
Okay, I am intrigued. What do you mean by leaking?
Well, think about it. Our unconscious actions often reveal more than we intend to let on.
Give me an example.
Let's say you're in a meeting and someone is pitching an idea they're clearly passionate about. A taker, even if they're putting on a good show of support, might unconsciously reveal their disinterest.
How so?
It could be anything from avoiding eye contact to having closed-off body language or even a subtly dismissive tone of voice.
So it's about paying attention to those nonverbal cues,
Mhm.
the little slips that give away what someone might be really thinking. This is getting deep. But how do we reconcile this idea of givers being careful, even a little strategic, with the fact that so many successful givers seem to give constantly?
Yeah.
How do they avoid burning out if they're always saying yes?
That's where chunking comes in. It's not about spreading yourself thin. It's about focusing your efforts for maximum impact, both for the people you're helping and for your own well-being.
Chunking your giving. So you're not giving less, you're just giving differently.
Exactly. And the book gives this great example of a Teach for America volunteer, Conry Callahan. She was working in a really challenging high school in Philadelphia and feeling totally burned out. But instead of just throwing in the towel, she decided to restructure her giving.
So instead of trying to do it all, she got strategic.
Exactly. She consolidated her volunteer hours and focused on this mentorship program for other teachers and students. She dedicated her Saturdays to it, and it made a huge difference.
So she went from feeling overwhelmed to feeling energized just by changing how she was giving.
And it wasn't just about her own energy levels. By chunking her giving, she actually ended up having a bigger impact on the people she was trying to help.
That's a win-win. And it reminds me of that study with the cold calling fundraisers, the ones who were told about the students receiving the scholarships they were raising money for, actually brought in more donations than those who were just focused on hitting a target.
It's amazing how knowing who we're helping can make such a difference. When we see that direct impact, it just makes the act of giving so much more meaningful.
It's not just about the doing, it's about the feeling you get from making a difference.
Exactly. And it all ties back into this idea of generalized reciprocity. You might not personally benefit directly from every act of giving, but you're contributing to a more generous system overall.
It's like you're planting these seeds of generosity that will eventually blossom throughout the community. Speaking of creating a more giving world, give and take, also talks about some strategies for encouraging this, right?
It does. And one of the most effective tools is the reciprocity ring, which we touched on earlier.
Right, where everyone brings a request for help to the table and also offers their own skills and resources to help others. It's like a generosity swap meet.
Exactly. And it's incredible to see how much generosity emerges from these rings. What's really interesting is that research shows that even takers are more likely to give in this kind of setting.
So even the people who might not be naturally inclined towards giving are more likely to step up in a reciprocity ring.
Exactly. The public nature of it makes it harder to slack off,
Yeah.
and they realize that giving back is in their own self-interest if they want to receive help too.
It's like it levels the playing field and creates a culture of reciprocity. Are there other ways to foster this kind of giving culture, especially in the workplace?
Absolutely. Companies can implement things like peer recognition programs where colleagues can acknowledge each other's contributions publicly.
That's a great way to boost morale and create a sense of community.
Definitely. Formal mentorship programs are another powerful tool. Having experienced employees guide and support newer team members can make a huge difference.
And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. Even simple things, like designing office spaces that encourage connection and collaboration, can go a long way. So it's about creating an environment where giving is valued and encouraged, not just seen as an afterthought, but let's get real for a moment. Even with all these strategies, givers can still get taken advantage of. How do we avoid that? So we were talking about how even with the best intentions, givers can sometimes end up on the losing end of the deal.
It's a constant balancing act for sure. Give and take goes deep on those common traps that givers often fall into. We talked about being too trusting and over-empathizing, but there's another big one that often flies under the radar,
Which is,
being too hesitant to advocate for themselves.
right, it's that whole nice guys finish last,
Yeah.
fear. Like if you're assertive or you ask for what you deserve, suddenly you're not being the good giver anymore.
Exactly. And givers often hesitate to speak up for their needs. They worry about coming across as selfish or demanding. But remember, self-care is not the opposite of giving. It's essential for it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You can't pour from a empty cup,
Mm.
right?
Mm.
So how do we walk that line? How do we advocate for ourselves without betraying that core value of generosity?
Well, the book talks about the strategy called relational accounts. Basically, it's about framing your needs in a way that highlights the positive impact they have on others.
So instead of just saying, I want a raise, you could say something like, having a raise would allow me to invest more in my team's development, or it would free up my time to focus on this project that will benefit everyone.
Exactly. You're still prioritizing the collective good, but you're also acknowledging your own needs in the process. It's not about suppressing your needs. It's about communicating them effectively.
Love it. Now, speaking of communication, one of the most mind-blowing parts of this book for me was the section on powerless communication, which on the surface seems like a total oxymoron. How can being powerless be a good thing?
Right. It's like flipping the script on how we think about persuasion. Powerless communication isn't about being weak or passive. It's about leading with authenticity, vulnerability, a genuine desire to understand where the other person is coming from.
It's about that human connection, right? People can sniff out a phony a mile away. Authenticity is key.
You hit the nail on the head. And one of the best examples of this in action is the story about Dave Walton, a lawyer with a stutter.
I remember this one. You'd think that would be a major disadvantage in a courtroom setting, right? Where communication is everything.
Exactly. But here's the thing. Juries actually found him more credible because of his stutter.
Really? Why is that?
They saw his vulnerability as a sign of honesty, sincerity. He wasn't trying to hide his imperfection. He owned it. And that resonated with them.
It's amazing how a perceived weakness can actually become a strength when it's approached with authenticity. It all comes back to that human connection, that feeling of, I see you and I trust you. That transcends any perceived flaw. This entire conversation has me thinking about my own approach to giving, not just in my personal life, but in my work as well.
That's what's so great about give and take. It makes you question your assumptions and gives you these practical tools to build a more fulfilling and successful life, both personally and professionally. And the research is clear, giving isn't just some feel-good idea. It can have a real ripple effect, not just on the people around us, but on our own well-being too.
It's not about being nice.
Yeah.
It's about being strategic, mindful, and ultimately finding fulfillment in our giving. Well, this has been a truly eye-opening deep dive.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts for our listeners before we wrap things up?
Give and take really offers a fresh perspective on what it means to succeed in a world that often seems to reward self-interest above all else. It reminds us that generosity, when approached with intention and awareness, can be a powerful force for good, both for ourselves and the world around us.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So to our listeners out there, we encourage you. Think about your own reciprocity style. Are you a giver, a taker, or a matcher? And how can you use these insights from give and take to forge deeper connections, reach your goals, and maybe even spark a few acts of generosity along the way? Trust us, this book is a must-read for anyone who wants to leave the world a little brighter than they found it.